Good afternoon, and welcome to our live stream with the Texas Public Policy Foundation. We are very pleased to be joined today by Oscar Ortiz Duarte, who is the Superintendent of Heritage Classical Academy. He began his career in education as a teacher of history up at the Great Heart Schools in Arizona and moved to be an assistant principal at a school here in Texas. He then moved to lead a school, Founders Classical Academy of Shirts in the San Antonio area, which he turned around and moved from an F rating up to a B minus, which is a lot of work and very impressive. So we're very excited to be joined by Oscar today. Welcome.
Thank you, Michael. I appreciate it. It's a pleasure to be here.
Awesome. Thank you. And we're going to talk today a little bit about the charter authorization process. In Texas, charter schools provide an option to kids who are looking for a different type of school. Mm-hmm. There are about 370,000 kids in charter schools in Texas today, but there's another 60,000 kids on wait lists to attend a public charter school. So there's a lot that the state can do to expand capacity and allow great charter schools to flourish and to grow. And that's why we're excited to be here and talk about Heritage Classical Academy. So maybe we can kick off just with HCA, like what is Heritage Classical Academy? What is its mission?
So I'm glad you asked that question, Michael, because I don't think we address that question enough in education today. I have seen the trajectory in education actually move away from the true purpose of education and put the focus on other things that are good and they're noble, things that parents want. For example, I want my children to be able to go to college, so I'm looking for a school that will prepare them for college. A lot of schools in their mission statement will say that they're college prep schools. Other mission statements that you'll find out there will say that they are preparing students to be global citizens or digital citizenship. You'll hear that. That's pretty common today. Those are good things, but I don't think it actually encapsulates what an education should be. And that's what Heritage Classical Academy does that sets it apart from other schools is we aim higher. So all those other mission statements and vision statements that you'll read out there or you'll hear of, which are good, we just don't think they really aim high enough when it comes to preparing children for a happy life, a flourishing life. So what is our mission? To answer your question, specifically, if you look at our mission statement, we're all about developing a child's knowledge to a state of wisdom and character to a state of virtue. Those are two words that you don't hear often enough today. I don't know. Have you heard a lot of those words recently in education?
Yeah, no, that's very unique. Yeah. So what does that look like for a child? Like what virtues are you looking to cultivate in children and give them practice in?
Great. So we want, again, the aim of a classical education is to make sure that a child will be fully flourishing in their adult life and happy. So that encapsulates a lot of things, right? We're not all happy doing the same things. Not all of us want to be carpenters. Not all of us want to be welders. Not all of us want to be doctors. I know my parents are very upset with me that I decided to go the philosophy route, but that's what made me happy. Yeah. They wanted me to be a lawyer or a doctor. Nevertheless, what a classical education does, which I think is so valuable, Michael, is that it gives children the skills and the virtues that you just pointed out, of the habits, to be able to choose from a broad range of different options once they graduate. So I work with families all the time. Some of the parents will come up to me, especially I work a lot with Hispanic parents, and I've had Hispanic parents reach out and say, well, Mr. Ortiz, I want our son or our child to be a welder, or I want them to be an electrician. And what I point out to them, and they're very grateful after this conversation, is, well, if we developed a school program that really just focused on producing welders or electricians, those are good things. But wouldn't you want an education that actually gave them more options as opposed to just limit them to one career or one vocation? And most families will answer, yeah, I want them to have a broad range of options. Yeah. A classical education will do that. So you can be, after you've been classically educated, you can be an electrician if you want to, or you can be the president of the United States, is what I tell our parents. And they just love that.
Yeah, yes. That's awesome. And that, I think, speaks to, as a parent, like thinking about our responsibilities to our children, it is to give them the skills that they need to live, right? To provide for themselves and their families, but also to live well, right? So once you have prosperity, what do you do with it?
That's right.
Right. So, and that's, I think, something that's very unique about the classical
Yes.
education, right? It's not just how we live, but how we live well.
That's beautiful. And it reminds me of a quote by W.E.B. Du Bois. And I think this is excellent because he's looking at the African-American experience right after emancipation.
Mm-hmm.
And the question in his mind is, what kind of education do we give our children
Mm-hmm.
in order for them to flourish, right? And there's this raging debate between him and another famous character whose answer to the question is, well, we got to give them technical, vocational skills, which is not a bad thing. And Du Bois admits it's not a bad thing, but his quote is just so succinct, it's beautiful. Hopefully I'm not going to butcher it, but it's what we want is an education, not that will make men carpenters, but will make carpenters into men. So the idea behind it is, we want to give them a kind of education that, yes, will give them the skills they need
Mm-hmm.
to thrive financially, but we want to give them a kind of education that is both humanizing and emancipating, and that will give them the tools to create culture, right? So poetry, music, art, all the things that enrich our lives. One thing I tell our sixth graders all the time is, we don't live to work, we work to live. So we are offering you an education that does that. Now think of that for a moment. If our education is just focused on teaching a child how to work, then we're sending the message that that's all that life is, right? So classical education does a very good job about turning that on its head and saying, we work to live, guys, and that's why we're going to focus on the things that will make you have a happy, vibrant, and flourishing life.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the critical part also of like a civic education as well, right? So there's the end of education that's to get a good job. There's the end of education that's to live well. And then there's part of an education where we learn about our obligations to our neighbors, like why and how we should care for them. And then within the state of Texas, education was established in order to preserve the liberties and rights of the people. That's why we support education. And it's like with classical education, I think you all approach that in a very unique way in teaching children about the founders of this nation, about the doctrine of natural rights, about really where our freedoms come from and then why they should be preserved, which was the original vision for public education.
And we do it without moralizing. This is important because when people think of classical, they think ancient, they think old-fashioned, they think strict and boot camp, which is not at all what a classical education is. A classical education focuses not even necessarily on the past. And I tell parents this all the time. It focuses on the things that are timeless. Right. So it's not about the past, it's not about the future. It's about timeless truths, important questions that we all ask ourselves to this day. And children are just eager and hungry to ask themselves those questions as well. And there's where the sense of wonder and creativity and imagination come in. And the reason why classical schools and classical classrooms are the most vibrant and full of joy classrooms that you'll find, because the children are not just being slammed with data, right, or facts. They're given living ideas, is what we call them. So I'll give you an example. Christopher Columbus sailed the ocean blue, and we give them that fact. If that's all we gave them, we'd essentially give them a husk without a soul. That's what we call it. The living idea behind that is, what motivated Christopher Columbus? What were his religious views? What was he trying? What were the intentions of his heart? Were they just or unjust? Those things, even at kindergarten, the children just love it because you're appealing to a side of their hearts and their minds that is more than just rote memorization, which at a classical school is not something that we do. We do memorize a lot, but it's living ideas. Once again, living ideas as opposed to just facts.
That's wonderful. And so when you have your model, your instructional model, you have your goal and your mission, and then you go to the community. What sort of feedback do you hear from the community in Houston when you engage with them What do they want for their children out of education?
Good. So parents are all different. This is
Okay.
I love working with families because
Yeah.
there's not a single parent that that would agree on anything, and you have to have a certain skill to be able to work with parents for that reason, because you're trying to serve their children, and that's the center of everything that we do. That's where our attention lies. However, if I were to like summarize the 2 or 3 basic things that all parents want, the first things that come to mind are, our parents want our children to return home good and better than when we drop them off. And one big complaint that I hear from a lot of parents who end up coming, they decide to transfer to our school is, Mr. Ortiz, every time I pick my child up from school in the afternoon, they just came back worse. Right? They've picked up really, terrible habits, vices that they learned from their peers, but also sometimes their teachers, patterns of behavior that are destructive and are not going to lead to their success in the long term. So those are the things that I hear parents tell me all the time, and why they're choosing a classical education, because our goal is to send those kids back home better than when they came to our school. So that's one thing they're looking for. Are they good? Are the children and their characters, are they growing in wisdom and maturity? The second thing that parents tell me all the time is, or that they're looking for, is, are the children, are they developing a sense of wonder and imagination? I think all of us as parents want our children to have that innocence, and that joy in just exploring and learning things. Again, another complaint is the children are just bored out of their minds, because all they're being given is facts, and sometimes not even facts, which leads me to the third thing that parents really want, which is, we want our children to come back home smarter. I'm sending them to school to learn something. And the biggest thing I've seen right now, Michael, and it's very saddening, is schools are no longer teaching content. It's very strange. Well, not to the degree in which we taught content a long time ago. So, since I've been born, at least, American children have been notorious for really bad geography. Now we're notorious around the world, not just for bad geography, but bad history, bad science, bad math, bad reading. I think 10 years ago, this was 10 years ago, there was a study that indicated that the average adult, American adult, reads at a 3rd or 4th grade level. So this is frightening, right? If this is where we're headed, as you know, I come from a third world country. I love my country. It's beautiful. But there's a vast majority of our people that are still illiterate. And I don't think the American people want to be there. No, right? It's not a pretty thing.
No, a free people cannot be illiterate, right? And this is like there's a beautiful passage in Frederick Douglass's work about how when he learned to read and taught himself to read, he says he forever unfit himself to be a slave. Which is just like, literacy is critical to having a free society. And so we need to get back. I think we've forgotten really what the great books are. We've forgotten what a good education looks like. So it is very exciting. It's a wonderful prospect to see that grow and flourish again, so that our next generation, and so that our next generation can have the blessings of liberty that we ourselves had.
Yes. So if I can make a quick connection,
of course, please.
So that Douglas connection is phenomenal, because he does point out that there's an intimate connection between our freedoms and our ability to read. Right. And I think it's important to dwell on that just a little bit, because I just called this kind of education, or classical education, emancipating. Douglas describes it as an education for freedom as well, or elevating of the soul of the human person. So you'll hear classical education at the college level that has a very different title, right? At the K-12 level, we call it classical. In the college level, we call it the liberal arts. And the word liberal really kind of encapsulates, or has a seed of the idea of freedom, of that emancipating of the human, of making the human unfit to be a slave. That's really the heart, I would say, of a classical education. And the reason why I think most of our families want it, right? When they see the diversity of ideas, the diversity of books, of cultures, of just content that our students are going to be steeped in, and it's never ending. I mean, there's just so much. We can't cover it all in a K-12 education. So our hope is that our students will go off to college and continue their education there. It's just remarkable.
Yeah.
So we're excited to do this. We hope that the state of Texas will authorize our charter. So if our families want to follow our story, they're more than welcome to.
Yeah, and that's a great segue. So moving over, you have your mission and your vision. You have the community that's very interested in this. Within the state of Texas, then you go to the state and you apply to them. But what does that whole process look like? Can you give us a sense of the major steps along the authorization path?
One of my favorite things to share with parents is the process, because I think that most people don't quite realize how difficult this process is.
Yeah.
And I don't say that to criticize it. I think it's actually important that it be difficult.
Mm-hmm.
We don't want just anyone opening a charter school and then failing our students. It'd be too bad.
Mm-hmm.
So it takes about a year to get through the whole process. And I brought for you, Michael, just so we can show our audience here and see if it's on screen.
Yeah.
This right here is the application to get a school authorized in the state of Texas. This is 400 pages long. Okay. Now, I don't want to discourage anyone, because I do want families and citizens, everyday normal citizens, to say, well, I want to do this.
Yeah.
So of this 400-page document, only about 100, which is this much right here, is what's called the narrative section.
Okay.
And the narrative section is where you write down your mission and vision statement. What kind of programs are you going to be providing the students in your area? What are what's the target population? How many grades do you plan to have open? That's your narrative, right? Your discipline policy and how you're going to hire good teachers, all of that. Everything else is what we call evidence. So these are all the documents. So the resumes of everyone on your board, letters of support from the community, because you want to be able to show not just the TEA, but also the State Board of Education, that your families want you in the area. So all of that goes there. So that's about 300 pages long. And you attach it, you submit it all in December. Generally, it's in December of every year. And then it takes about 4 months to hear back from the TA. During that time, very important, you want to be working with the community. You want to continue increasing that level of support and that excitement for your school. And then you have what's called, this is the second stage after applying, the capacity interview. And the capacity interview is with the TEA. And this is a panel, if you will, of about 10 to 15 TEA officials. Each one of them has a very specific focus that they're looking at in your application. And they ask you a barrage of questions to test and prod to see that you actually know your own application and that you can really make this happen. If you pass that stage, then you go on to the State Board of Education, which is in June generally. So you wait, four more weeks. And then in June is when the State Board of Education decides to veto or not veto your school. And after that, you've got your charter school. So the big parts of the process are the application and then the capacity interview, right? And then the recommendation and the board vote. That's right. So 3 stages.
So, gotcha. So for individuals, innovative educators that are looking at this authorization process, what recommendations would you offer to them to prepare for success, like to have a successful capacity interview, for example?
Fantastic. Yes, so there are a couple of things that I would highly recommend. First of all, you want to start, so there's 3 stages or 3 steps like we pointed out, but before that, you do want to have a board. Right? So you want to make sure that you found the right people to be part of your board that will be representing and backing this project. Now, the board is a volunteer position, so nobody gets paid for all this work. It's a lot of work. It's a year's time of work. Nobody's getting a single paycheck for that. It's community service. Let's put it that way. Then once you have your board, you want to make sure that on your board you have a variety or diversity of talents, as well as people who represent the community you're going to be serving.
Yeah.
Right. So we're planning on going into a very diverse part of Houston. So on our board, we're going to have Hispanics, we're going to have African Americans, we're going to have a diversity of people on our board.
Yeah.
Now, diversity of talents as well. You want to make sure you have an accountant or a school principal, or maybe someone who's done education in the past. You can have nurses, you can have people involved with HR. You want professionals who have, what's the word I'm looking for, who've had success in their careers, and that will add a lot of strength to your application. You want to incorporate it because it's a nonprofit, and then after that, you do the rest, which is the application, the capacity interview, and then the State Board of Education.
Okay, that's very helpful. That's great, Oscar. And then when you go to those capacity interviews, what sort of questions should the applicants expect?
Great. So they're going to be very specific about the application.
Okay.
And it will, every official on the TEA will take their turn to ask you questions. It's about a 2-hour interview.
Okay.
And it's all public, so you can see it live streamed. And if in case anyone watching wants to kind of learn what it looks like, I would recommend that they go back and look at the previous 2 or 3 years of public hearings.
Okay.
Questions such as, well, if they're concerned about, say, you didn't say enough about your special education program, that's perhaps one of the biggest ones, and it should be, because how are we going to be supporting our children with disabilities? So you need to have a very strong program to be able to give the Texas Education Agency the confidence that you will be providing the children that need those supports, the supports that are legally their right. Okay, so that's one question. Another one is generally revolving around the discipline policy. Is your discipline policy going to discriminate? Is it going to be effective in coaching or mentoring the children? Is it going to be punitive? So those are things that you also want to be ready to address at the interview. Budget questions. If you really want to make sure that you have an accountant look at the budget, because if you made a mistake in the numbers, that's going to be a red flag. And a lot of questions are going to be asked about that. So where is this money going? Why is it going there? Again, it's a very rigorous process. No, not a lot of people get through it. So you'll have 30 applicants every year. Half of those make it through the first phase. And then less than half make it to the State Board of Education. And then at the State Board of Education, maybe 6 or 7 schools will be authorized every year. So from 30 to 6, it's a real
so it's a very rigorous
process.
It's a very rigorous process. And so it sounds like in those capacity interviews you have to be ready for anything and everything at a very fine level of detail. So that's very impressive. So and then with regard to the meetings, well, so we're in late May right now at the time of the conversation. So TEA will make their recommendations this Friday, and then those will go to the State Board of Education for their conversation in June. And the State Board of Education, at a very high level, it's a 15-member board. They're elected positions.
That's right.
And the State Board of Education can decide to reject the recommendation that's offered by TEA. So can you just give us a sense of those meetings, like who participates in those meetings, and then how can applicants set themselves up for success in those conversations as well?
So I'm glad you asked that question, because we are waiting for the results this Friday. So this Friday, we will know if we're going to be going up to the State Board of Education or not. It's important for us to draw as many supporters to the State Board of Education hearing, because it's a public hearing and it's in person. Now you can watch it online if you'd like to, but there's 2 days. There's the 14th, June 14th, which is a Tuesday. That's public testimony for anyone who'd like to testify in support of charter schools. And then the next day, which is what we call the public hearing, is where the panel of 15 elected officials ask the chairman of the board and then the superintendent of the school questions. And that's about an hour and 20-minute. Well, it really depends on how many questions they ask. It could go longer. But you're standing up there. It could be nerve-wracking. Someone described it. I thought it was really funny. the sense of, that sense of being nervous, described it as, what's that famous American show? America's Got Talent.
Oh, okay.
America's
Yeah.
Got Talent.
Yeah.
Where everyone on the board is assignment. In other words,
Oh,
right?
wow.
So
Okay.
very
Yeah.
tough questions,
Yeah.
which are meant to gauge how prepared each of the candidates are. Can
Yeah.
they think on their feet? Do they know the application well? And do they have the best intentions
Yeah.
at heart in order to serve the children and the families that the elected officials represent?
Yeah.
So there's a lot of responsibility on their shoulders, and they are there to make sure that they're not allowing bad schools to get through.
Yeah.
Which is, I think it's great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it makes sure that the people that are running charter schools in Texas are
Right.
running high quality schools.
Oh, yes.
So
That they're held accountable.
yeah.
Yes.
So that's great to hear. And then given your background,
Mhm.
improving the performance of a school from an F to a B in
Yes.
San Antonio, we wish you the best of luck. We hope it goes well.
Thank you.
And the mission and vision that you all have is just, it's wonderful and adds so much more to what education is in Texas right now. So it shows us what education really could and should be.
That's right.
At its best. So
yes, highly recommend that people watch, because we have some great data and some statistics showing how classical education is actually outperforming some of the best private schools in the nation.
wow.
So,
Okay.
and we're going to be showing that at the hearing on the 15th. But if anyone wants to show up to the 14th, they can.
Yeah,
so, yeah,
that's great.
More than welcome.
Thank you. There is one question that I'm kind of wondering about, stepping back from the authorization process, which is like, we know there's a lot of kids that want to go to charter schools. What can the state do to improve like the expansion to improve access to great charter schools in Texas?
Well, 10 years ago, this was a very controversial answer. 5 years ago, it became more moderate. Now, everybody wants to see this happening.
Okay.
And it is, I strongly believe, Michael, that we should fund children, not systems. And I think that the money should follow the child. If a child wants to go to a private school, then the money should follow that child. If a child wants to go to a charter school, then the money should follow that child. Same for public school. That's the only way. You mentioned earlier, 60,000 children on a wait list. Is that right?
Yeah.
Currently in the state of Texas, 60,000 children on a wait list to get into a charter school. We're never going to serve the amount of need or demand if we're not opening up options faster.
Yeah.
So that would be my response to that. And just to be able to corroborate why I say that parents want this, the most recent poll that was done by Real Clear Politics, I believe, or Real Clear Education, indicates that a majority of families on both sides of the political spectrum, both Democrats and Republicans, so this is a majority on both sides, they want to see school choice for children. And where it's highest, it's among Hispanics and African Americans, because they're the most affected right now by poor quality schools. Yeah. So it only makes sense.
Yeah. And we see that across the state of Texas. Like you look, since over the last 2 years, we look at reading and math proficiency, and it's really taken a dive over the last 2 school years. And we'll see how the current school year, the data shows when we get that. But there's just such a need among our kids for just rigorous teaching and learning. To teach them to read, to teach them to do math. We've got to get there.
It's shocking to even say it, that we have to go back to the basics. And I think our families, and one of the reasons why families are more open to school choice is after the pandemic. Well, one, our children have fallen behind 2 years, and two, parents were able to see what was happening in the classroom. And they realized that the rigor that we once knew or thought was happening is not there anymore. So yeah, we need to go back to making sure that our students are receiving good content, that they're really asked and to, raise the bar and ask them to meet the challenge, which the children can. We've seen it happen. And I think we're going to begin to see the kinds of schools that we want. Yeah,
agreed. And we may have time for one question from the audience at this point. Yeah, so that's a great question from the audience. So what would you say to parents who have doubts or concerns about transferring their kids to a charter school?
That's an excellent question. So the first thing that I always tell all parents is ask for a meeting with your principal. Don't just transfer a child into a charter school. Sit down with your principal. Ask for a tour. If the charter school does not provide for those two things, those are red flags. I wouldn't go to a school where I'm not allowed to meet with the principal or have a tour. Do that at your public school. If you can't have an audience with your principal, then you got a problem. So sit down with your principal, look at their mission and vision statement, ask them tough questions. For example, one question that I recommend parents ask principals all the time is, if there were a book that children must read, only one, what would that be? That will tell you everything you want to know about the vision and the mission that that school leader has for your children. So if that's a book that you find a little bit frightening or controversial, then you've got your answer. There's more. I'll be happy to give more details. But first two things is meet with your principal, have a school tour so that you get a sense of what's really happening behind the walls of the school. And that'll give you the confidence and the peace you need.
That's really, and that's a great point. So when parents go to the school and they do like a walkthrough among the classrooms, what should they look for? Because it's easy to kind of get distracted by things that may not affect teaching and learning, but look good, right? So how can a parent know that this is a good school?
Oh, that's an excellent question. One thing that I like to train parents to do when they're doing tours is figure out a way to make it to the cafeteria when the children are actually in the cafeteria, or stall in the hall. So one thing that we call the stall in the hall strategy. One thing that tour guides don't like to do is keep parents in the hallways when students are transitioning. And the reason is it's the most telling time of the school day because you're able to see the culture of the school. How are the students interacting in the hallways? Are they running? Are they screaming? Do they even look at you and acknowledge that you're present? Do they say, "Good morning, ma'am," "Good morning, mister," or you're right? Are they respectful? Also pay attention. Are the teachers in the hallways or are the students allowed to run free range? Generally, when students are allowed to run free range, that's when you have bullying happening. That's when you got children exposed to material that is not age appropriate. So you want to stall in the halls. If you can't go to the cafeteria, stall in the halls, and then that'll give you kind of a picture of what to expect all day, every day for your child.
Yeah, that's a great tip and a great pointer that parents can take away when they're considering a school to transfer their kids into. So, well, thank you very much for the conversation, Oscar. We wish you the best of luck. And you all have a great day. Thank you.